Alright, so let me first explain the difference between each leader and why we chose Katakuri. Big Mom lets us get some more control over our life once we get to that late game point. However, it doesn't have as much aggro as some of our other options here, especially Katakuri, which is the one we're going with. Katakuri lets us get the 7k with 1 Dawn, and against something like Redbeard, if we put 2 Dawn on him, we swing for that magic 8k number. While we do get less control with Katakuri, we still can control the order of what is in our life, and also mess with all opponents' life. Katakuri is just more proactive throughout the entire game than something like Lin. Following in a similar logic to this, we don't run Black-Yellow Big Mom, because, well, Black-Yellow Big Mom is even less aggressive than Yellow Big Mom. Not only that, it takes a whopping 4 Dawn to use her skill, which by that point in the game, since it's only live late game, we're going to want to be dropping our 10 cost and 8 drops. Lastly, Yamato is a very good yellow option this format, as it does pretty well into red and mostly any other deck, but it loses very hard to Charlotte Katakuri. Since Katakuri can power through in the early game, and then, since it can just drop 10 moms and eat through that 2 remaining life, Yamato ends up being in a bit of a pickle. So that leaves us with the best overall pick for yellow, being Charlotte Katakuri. Now on to the actual deck list. The key benefit to playing this deck is that it largely plays itself. Honestly, you don't have to do too much if you correctly set up your triggers and what ratio you're running them in your deck. Cards in this deck can roughly be split into 3 categories: counter value, triggers, and your top end. Let's start by going over our counter value. Charlotte the Pudding is our searcher, of course, 4 of. This really can be anything, so it comes out first to get out of the way. For counter value, we have 4 Streusen, 4 Pudding, and 4 Sanji. Now Sanji and Streusen do actually do something of note. Pudding, however, is just there for the 2k guard value. Sanji is one of the best options you can drop going second, and it just immediately lets you start accruing value. It is a bit of a heavy Dawn commitment, as playing Sanji will block you out of using some of your other 4-drops, but it's not the worst thing in the world for getting an extra card in hand, which this deck really wants to have. Streusen will sometimes let you get rid of a 1-drop, which matters when they're blockers or something else. It's not the most reliable thing, since you do need to discard a trigger card from hand, but we do have a lot of those, and never discount the fact that you can do this. Now, for our main triggers, our trigger units, 4 Charlotte to Brûlé, 4 Shirioshi, and then our miscellaneous units of 4 Prospero, 4 Cracker, and 3 Smoothie. So Brûlé is our only blocker. We tend to not need them because we can heal, but we do still want to be able to pressure this. Ripping this out of life against some decks is absolutely devastating. Of course, in order to help us dig more, we have Shirioshi. Terrible to play this from hand, but absurd when we get it from life. It's going to let us draw 3, discard 2. Insane filtering, insane value. We also have Prospero. Prospero is probably the best low-cost unit in this deck right now. You throw him out there, he swings for 5k, and when he dies, when our opponent kills him, we get to dig for another card. This just puts our opponent in a lose-lose situation, so basically if you see him early, always try to play him. Cracker is oppressive. A simple double attack when our opponent's at more life than us is pretty absurd. Not only that, also like Prospero, he is free if we get him from life. And we're of course going to know when we have that with Katakuri skill. When Cracker is live, our opponent has to block him. It's too much lost value not to. And of course, just supplementing this, we have Smoothie. Smoothie's effect is terrible, but it is just another free unit to play from life. Having units on the board that we don't have to pay Dawn for is absurd. Especially because all we're trying to do is stall until we hit late game. Supplementing these units, we also have 2 Katakuri. It's not the best, but it is pretty good against some decks like red, really any of the red decks, because that 6k base matters, and it does get rush in a lot of matchups. I would run it at more, but oftentimes we end up being ahead of the opponent in terms of life. So it ends up being not super optimal. For removal, we have Thunderbolt. Just being able to have a 2-cost remove one of our opponent's units is kind of crazy. It does cost a life, but that's fine. By killing an opponent's unit with this card, we manage to basically prevent an attack they would have done anyway, so it effectively goes even. Eco Sovereignty is very funny when you get it in life, as it just lets you heal another one. It also does have a very good counter value effect of just plus 5k. It's a bit awkward to use during late game, especially when you're going to be dropping 10 cost moms and you won't have Dawn up for it, but knowing this is something you have available, especially early game. Oh my, it's so absurd. Now for our late game, 4 8-drop Katakuri and 4 10-drop Big Mom. Once you hit the late game, what you're effectively going to be doing is throwing out 1, maybe 2 Katakuri, and then just start hammering down the Big Moms. Katakuri removes basically everything we'd ever want to in this game, outside of 1 or 2 10-drops and 9-drops, but most decks cannot compete with Katakuri just putting one of their units into life. It gets around on KO effects, and we can use it to make our opponent's security terrible once they get to late game. It's also noteworthy that you can put your own units into life with this if you want to reuse trigger effects. The most common case for this is to say you got a Shirahoshi earlier in the game and it's not doing anything. There's nothing really valuable to throw from your opponent's board into their life, but you could get an extra attack and even more hand value with a Shirahoshi back in your life. So you play Katakuri, stack this back. Also, if you want to protect the unit like Cracker after you've swung with it, you can put it back into your life and force your opponent to attack into it again. Big Mom is the heart and soul of the deck. When you play one, you go +2 in the most impactful sort of way. It's an extra life, and your opponent loses a life. If you resolve 2 of these in any game, you have won. Also following this up is just that absurd 12k stat line. It's not okay. I mean, seriously. Once you start dropping these, your opponent cannot guard them without a absurd amount of blockers. So it really just is a death sentence for most decks.